How funny is this? Who would have thought a pack of Aussies doing a gin tasting at the Royal Academy of Arts in London? That's bullshit. How good's this, eh? You'll be hooked on a Friday afternoon at 4:30. So look, if you think the chat's a bit rubbish, just drink the gins and piss off, frankly. I think you'll rather like them, though. It is a fascinating time. It's an incredible time for all of us as distillers, but I think it's a particularly exciting time in Australia. Just to put some context around what's going on. So just to give you an idea, I've got Dave here from the Manly Spirits, obviously in the beautiful northern beaches of Sydney. Give him a massive round of applause. George, so we're representing quite a bit of diversity. So I'm from Four Pillars. We're in Healesville, just outside of Melbourne, in the Yarra Valley. The Manly, obviously, beautiful northern beaches. George here is from the Never Never Distillery, which is about to be based in McLaren Vale, but currently in Adelaide, Australia's 17th most interesting city. No one knew we had 17 cities. Let's be honest. I don't think we do, but we do love Adelaide as an alumni of Adelaide University. It's great. And Nicole from the beautiful Barossa Valley at Seppeltsfield Road Distillery, brand new, 18 months old?
9 months. 9
months old. Gee, Jiminy Crickets, 9-month-old distillery. And each of us will be at Ginapalooza tomorrow. That is why we are here, correct? So down at Tobacco Docks tomorrow. It is... Frankly, I mean, it's one of those moments. Obviously, we've been going about five or 6 years. You've been going 2 or 3 years. 2 years.
Less than 2.
George, less than 2 and 6 months. So we are a nascent. We are a very young, up-and-coming industry. We are the veterans of the Australian gin industry. I mean, we are 246 years younger than Gordon's. But in an Australian context, we're old. We've been going just about 5.5 years, almost 6 years in the Yarra Valley, making our first gin in 2013. I also, for my sins, happen to chair the Australian Distillers Association, and an organisation that when I took on this august role, and I feel a bit like Jacob the Viscount Folkestone, they are similar roles in a global outlook. I mean, people often refer to the Royal Academy of Arts president and the Australian Distillers Association president in the same breath. No, that's the first time it ever happened. But we had our first ever, before these guys even existed, we had our first sort of group conference, if you could call it such a thing, in 2014, and there were literally 11 people represented there. Some distilleries had 2 people there. And this year in November, we'll have a conference of well over 200. We have probably 170 distilleries now in Australia. Every one of them is making gin. What a surprise. Even if you're making Tasmanian whiskey or you're making something anywhere else, you are making gin. The gin figures that the IWSR report has just come out, last week, most of you would have seen the global reports, and the Australian reports is phenomenal. And I wasn't being rude on my phone. I actually just this morning got sent through some stats, but consumption of Australian gin in Australia is up 33% year on year. And as I wrote here, and this is last year, that locally made gin now represents 14% of all gin consumed in Australia. And I was just trying to find so that's last year's figure, but the figure that just came out is more like 18 to 20%. So Australians are now drinking Australian gin, and you've got to remember that literally in 2010, 2012, that figure would have been as close to 0 as you could have imagined. So it's a big, we are a top 20 market in the world as a domestic gin consumer. We're certainly not a top 20 market in the world in terms of gin producer. But there are some great gins coming out. We're going to see 6 of them today. And I do think, this is a Coles to Newcastle moment for all of us, isn't it? That, who would have thought? It's a difficult thing to even imagine that the closing tasting at a thing like the Gin Guild would be a bunch of Australian gin distillers. It seems entirely incongruous, and probably is. I mean, a terrible mistake by Nick. He probably thought we were Kiwis. Who knows? But or nice people, Scottish, Welsh. I don't know. But we do have a great industry in Australia, and I think there's a couple of reasons why Australia has become pretty quickly such an important player in the gin landscape, and we're going to see it through here. One is that Australia's always been has been making great drinks, and Australia's had only a relatively recently liberalised drinking culture. If anyone had come to Australia before the 2000s, you would have known that we drank a shit ton of beer and some really bloody awful Chardonnay, and then we just fell over and went home. And we did this in a giant, vast pub or a surf club, right? And there wasn't anything that was even remotely reminiscent of what you would call a cocktail bar or sophisticated drinking. And it was only, first of all, in Melbourne and then more recently Sydney and Adelaide and various other parts, although still yet to get to Queensland. But anyway, one day Queensland will become sophisticated, but it's in no rush, put it that way. That Australia started getting great cocktail bars. And we had a great reputation. We were making good wine. We have subsequently, in the last 10 years, started making great beer. And there was no particular reason why we wouldn't make great spirits. And it was the Tasmanians, I suppose, who led the way. You know, a guy called Bill Lark, who was my predecessor at the Distillers Association and still alive and a great guy, who first was, famously fishing with his father-in-law in Tasmania and was wondering why he couldn't make whiskey in a place that just felt so much like Scotland, the cold, wet coastal areas of Tasmania. And it took him a good decade to get it right. And we, as distillers, all of us stand upon the shoulders of greats, whether it's 250 years ago in the Gordons or Tanqueray or anything else. It's all of us owe a lot to those who went before us, who did the hard yards. We just come in literally, to use an Australian metaphor, and just surf the wave that someone else has already. We're dropping in on them. That's a surfing term that no one will understand, is it? Anyway, someone else is on the wave first, and you just cut in on them, and then you end up having a fist fight out the back of the surf. Anyway, unnecessary chat. Here's the ones we're going to have. Speaking of surf, we've also got brookies in the mix, but. Eddie's not here today, but Eddie is, interestingly enough, and I don't think you'll disagree with me here, George, Eddie is the best looking distiller in the world.
Yeah.
If Eddie Brooks worked for Four Pillars, we would sell 1 million cases. Right? Honestly, I go and do tastings with Eddie Brooks and it's embarrassing. Like, my wife throws us. I know, everyone's going, wow, a wife, didn't expect that. Well, we can all have a fake. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Eddie Brooks is the world's best looking distiller, with the possible exception of the handsome Mauritian guy who's up at Husk. Yeah, why am I doing this? Anyway. Good looking boys. And if Eddie's at Ginapalooza tomorrow, make sure you come down. He's not in town? Why don't we taste some gin? And whilst... Wow, there's an intro no one expected. Why don't we start with this gin, which, humbly, I guess, when it was launched on December the 3rd, 2013, it's funny, listening to you can name the exact day that you sold your very first bottle of gin. This gin was first sold on December the 3rd, 2013. For us, and not to, we're going to taste some gins here today. That our background was all in wine, and I think one of the other reasons why Australia have got great distillers right now is a lot of us have had backgrounds in wines, a lot of us had backgrounds in bars, and for me, I was sort of on the fringes of the booze industry in Australia for well over 20 years, and we never wanted to make London dry gin because the simple thing that we thought is, well, if you want a London dry gin, you can have a London dry gin in London. We wanted to make something that was very representative of what we thought modern Australia was. Even from the packaging, everything we did, we wanted it to represent what, if you came to Sydney or you came to Melbourne, you went to a great new modern Australian restaurant or bar, you didn't see koalas and kangaroos, and you didn't see, any sort of kitsch Australiana and crocodiles or anything like that. It was the best of what we thought was the Mediterranean, the best of the Middle East, the best of Asia, and then some beautiful local Indigenous Australian botanicals. And that's how we landed on this rare dry gin, which has very luckily won double gold 3 times now, twice in San Francisco, once in New York, and multiple gold medals around the world. And again, you can remember April 7, 2014 at 6 o'clock in the morning when you wake up and you get that email from San Francisco. And then we thought, shit, we actually only entered it just before Christmas in 2013 to see whether the judges would recognise it in the gin category. Because there was no such thing. For instance, the San Francisco, everyone knows the international wines, the World Spirits Competition in San Francisco used to have less than 70 gins in it. I think last year it had 300, maybe 400 gins entered in it. And it's getting increasingly difficult to judge those. You would know this. Increasingly difficult to judge them because, one, you've got multiple panels. No longer can a similar, sort of smaller coterie of judges judge all of the spirits in a category. So you really don't... It's much harder these days to get consistency out of shows, I think. And one of the things that I fear in gin shows is what happened in Australian wine shows, which just big, stupid things won trophies because you noticed them. In a lineup of 150 subtle gins, the biggest one wins. And that's what happened in the Australian wine show system, which gave us the over-oaked Barossa Shiraz phenomenon and big busty Chardonnays that we've been trying to wean ourselves off now for the last 10 years because we convinced ourselves, because they were winning the trophies and the Jimmy Watson trophies and the gold medals and all that sort of stuff, that they were great. Interesting, not here to talk about wine. Here, cheers. Sorry, David, you're shaking your head. You've heard this shtick before, haven't you?
Once or twice.
Yeah. That is deliberately, that is a gateway gin. It's deliberately light, elegant, it's got lovely citrus. We use whole oranges, right? So not preserved, not dried. Whole oranges in a 450 litre still, we would put 5 kilos of fresh oranges. There's a couple of people here who I know have been to the still. We use Carl, we have 4, about to get our 5th Christian Carl still. Which were not, obviously, particularly, you've got one I know as well, don't you? Yeah, they're fantastic stills. And we now make, across our range, we'd be making about, what did you say you made of that rhubarb gin again? 400 tonnes of rhubarb. Can anyone do rhubarb maths and figure out how many bottles that is? I'm desperately keen to know how many bottles he makes. But yeah, we'll make about 450 to 500,000 bottles of gin this year across the number one will be this rare dry, which is actually also the base for the Bloody Shiraz gin. But this is our gin and tonic gin. Deliberately, we have a distillery door that puts 90,000, probably 100,000 people through the doors this year as a visitor centre. So it's really, really popular. And this is our gateway gin. Deliberately light, elegant, Fever Tree Med tonic. People who come into the distillery and say, I don't like gin. Yeah, there's one in every 4. Like, if a group of 4 come, there's one of those four people, particularly in Australia, don't drink gin. And unless they're the designated driver, when we attempt to be responsible, we try to force them into liking gin. And this is where this this breadth of the gin category, I think, is interesting, because they may go, no, don't like that one. We'll go, well, what about a Bloody Shiraz gin, or what about a Cascade gin, or what about, and all of a sudden, the resistance they had to gin per se, done and dusted, has been removed. They go, oh, well, I don't like that gin, but I quite like barrel-aged gin, or I quite like a citrusy gin from the beautiful Northern Beaches. Oh! Dave, you, obviously Tim, you're a distiller, spent a long time here. Pernod Ricard, worked with Desmond, who I saw here somewhere today. Not here anymore? Was here earlier. Tell us a bit about Manly Spirits and why this is so delicious.
Yeah, so our distiller Tim is an Englishman, so
yeah.
I guess, we've taken the best of British gin and made it Aussie. It's just, that's what we do. And, the bottle stuff earlier, my wife's the designer, so we think we've got a lovely bottle. But, it's blue like an ocean wave. I'd have to do it. That's what she'd tell you. Anyway, so this is a contemporary style gin. Have you picked it up and had a sniff? Citrus forward, number 2.
Yep.
So, if you've been to Manly or the Northern Beaches of Sydney, it's oceanic, there's beaches nearby. So what Vanessa said to me, that's my wife and our marketing manager, she said, you've got to make a gin that tastes like the ocean and the coast. So that was her remit. So that you got your brand thing, what's your thing, if you know what I mean? What about the coast and the ocean? So this one's got sea parsley in it. Actually, it's the only common normal botanical it's got in it is juniper, of course. Everything else is a bit unusual. So it's got something like fresh, can you taste it? Fresh coriander leaf. That's unusual. I don't know, does anyone know a gin that's got fresh coriander? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Mm-hmm. A thing called sea parsley, which grows by the sea in Sydney. Then a couple of stuff. You got lemon myrtle in your gin?
Yep.
Lemon myrtle. Lemon aspen, which is a rainforest plant, and some my lemon. So it's just a different gin. We do a dry gin, our Australian dry gin, which is London dry style. We do one-shot method. This one's just contemporary. I don't know what you think of it, but it's slightly unusual. It's just something different for bartenders to have. Makes a cracking gin and tonic with a milder sort of tonic, less quinine.
Lemon myrtle's a phenomenal. Does everyone put some lemon myrtle in? You don't? You don't? Okay, interesting, because it's it's clearly a mistake that both of you have made. But anyway, might leave that there.
We put in our limoncello as well. We put lemon myrtle.
Yeah, it's got about 7 or 8 times higher levels of citral than lemons do. So it's the most incredibly lemony indigenous leaf. Like it's phenomenal, and we do very much. And you talk about this. I think this is one of the reasons why Australian gin... Dave, were you talking about terroir? Who was talking about terroir before? Yeah. I just think this is the most fascinating... One of the great competitive advantages that we have as gin distillers is our ability to show, the coastal surf of the northern beaches of Sydney. And that sense that you've just fallen under a wave and you just get a sort of a briny, salty, lemony... I feel like you've had a Calippo on the beach. Does everyone know what a Calippo is? That tastes to me but like that lemony Calippo after just getting crunched on a giant... by a huge bloody wave at Manly before you go in and have a couple of schooners. And that doesn't taste like our gin. And I think one of the fun things, which is a sort of a almost I suppose a pan-Australian gin, and we're not trying to we have other gins that are very much of the Yarra, and the Bloody Shiraz is obviously one where we say, well, people kept asking us why we wouldn't make a sloe gin, and we're like, we don't have sloe berries in the Yarra, but we've got shitloads of Shiraz. So let's think about whether or not how we can make a gin with Shiraz. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about this gin and our opportunity is that that a Yarra Valley gin or a gin from the northern beaches of Sydney ought not taste like a gin from California or one from Bermondsey. It should have something unique. It needs its own reason for being. Never. We were having tell us about the argument we were just having, George, about whether or not this is the first Australian gin ever to win a global trophy for Best in Show at the World Gin Awards.
So this gin...
The answer is yes. This is incredible gin, incredible.
Never Never is all about the concept of fearless spirit. So you would have noticed if you've nosed it, it's big, it's bold, it's incredibly juniper forward. So we decided to focus everything we do around that. It really ties into that discussion earlier about, what direction gin's going in these days. And as Stu's touched on, Australia is really largely focusing on the Australian botanicals to create very unique styles. So we kind of went the complete opposite way and actually decided to celebrate juniper. Our core product is called the Triple Juniper. This one is our mid-range, slightly higher proof, 52% ABV. And we distill the juniper in 3 ways. It's steeped, fresh pot and vapour distilled to give a really complex element. 8 other botanicals, mostly traditional London Dry style, but 1 Australian botanical being Tasmanian pepperberry. It gives that sort of savoury Sichuan style finish that you might be picking up on the palate. We decided to use that one only after experimenting with 20 or 30 because it was the one that really sat well with the juniper forward style that we wanted to create. And I guess we wanted to be quite brave in making a globally relevant juniper forward gin that, although yes, it's Australian, you can appreciate what it is in London or New York or Hong Kong. So this particular one, the Southern Strength, a slightly higher lemon, fresh lemon, coriander seed and angelica root, so a bit more savoury profile, very fresh and bright. Won World's Best Classic Gin at the World Gin Awards here in London. We just finally picked up our trophy yesterday because we didn't make it over for the awards. And we also picked up 3rd highest trending global gin brand by Drinks International, which was pretty cool considering we didn't have an export business at the time. So it's just off the back of bartenders taking some bottles around to their favourite bars and conferences and that kind of thing.
So I guess there's something interesting between you two guys. I mean, you went and got Tim and a highly credentialed professional from Pernod Ricard. You're involved with young Baxter.
Yeah.
So tell us about him. I mean, he's a very well-credentialed bartender who has a great... I mean, he's out London Dry almost with that sort of style of gin.
That's the whole point. Yeah, so my business partner Sean was the national brand ambassador for the Diageo Reserve brands. Used to work with Johnny Walker and before that with Tanqueray, so I had a very firm understanding of, I guess, the category and what it takes to build a brand. So that is exactly what we're trying to do is out London Dry, the London Dries, and that's why we're here.
You would never know the guy who made that used to work for Tanqueray, would you? It's like Tanqueray on steroids.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing. Just realised half the room's Diageo, aren't they? Okay. Look, I only ever expected to come once, Nicholas, I'll be honest with you. Wow. I've opened that up for... Yeah, no, I'm not going to... Yeah. Sometimes you just got to let it go, haven't you? Yeah, yeah. Look, once was enough. I'm done. You know, I'm just going to take a photo of myself with Viscount Folkestone and post it on Instagram like I come here all the time. But they are, and again, I think one of the things that, you know, is evident to this sort of room of people who are professionals and taste a lot and all that sort of stuff is that we have, all of a sudden, going from nothing, we've got an interesting story to tell. And it's not it's not a story where everyone's trying to do the same thing. And I think we learnt, certainly I learnt from being in the wine industry, one of the things that frustrated me in to some degree, a little bit in the Australian wine industry, but also quite a bit in the US wine industry, is they kept wanting to be France. They kept wanting to do, you know, when you go to the Napa, they were trying to out chateau a chateau. And I'm like, well, try to do your own thing. But that's what I love about Never Never. It's powerful, and it's having a crack at doing something unbelievably well. And the packaging, you know, the packaging on both of those, again, really represents something great and interesting and new and unique and bloody delicious gins. If anyone's got a comment or a question, I'm just going to keep going. No, you've got a chance, but we'll probably move on. Brookies. So here we go to Byron Bay. Has anyone been up to Byron Bay, the Northern Rivers of New South Wales? I mean, like literally one of the most beautiful places that you'll go to, with a beautiful, incredible hinterland, literally, you know, a few kilometres inland, and some of the most spectacular beaches. The most easterly point of Australia is Byron Bay, Cape Byron. And the Brookie family, the Brooks are famous macadamia nut growers. Huge macadamia plantation, and they have the most beautiful farm just on the western edge of Byron Bay, heading into that hinterland. And again, they've got great expertise in growing stuff. You know, incredible macadamia farm. I read a piece in the paper the other day that said 90% of the macadamia in the world that is grown came out of one tree on the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. Did you read that the other day? Incredible. Not very biodiverse, I mean, very mono. Anyway, there's not a lot of genetic differentiation in the macadamia, which is why all macadamias taste exactly the same, obviously. Which goes entirely against what we were just trying to talk about, which was the diversity of Australian gins. Yeah, forget about the macadamia story. Anyway, Brookies, interestingly, do make a slow gin, but they make their slow gin out of Davidson plums, which is an indigenous, really tart Australian plum. So they call it SLOW, slow Davidson plum gin. So kind of funny in an Australian context, I suppose. And this is their dry gin, right? So again, trying to use some of that native river mint. Now there's quite a bit of that going on. There's quite a few distilleries using native river mints and various other river botanicals. Did anyone know a really interesting story that 250 years ago next year, Cook landed in what is now called Botany Bay. Yeah, it was actually going to be called Stingray Harbour. This is an actual true story, because you know how in the world of learning things, this is just the most random thing. You know who told me this story? A guy called John Hillgren, who is incredible Swedish distiller. Many of you will know him from Hernö. Right, he owns and makes Hernö, and we've done a collaboration gin with the Swedes. And we've got this, and he told us this story that there was a guy called Solander on the first fleet, not the first fleet, predates that, on the Endeavour with Cook, and he went out with Banks, Joseph Banks, who was a very famous botanist at the time, and went right around Botany Bay when they had landed, and said he saw more incredible botany in his first walk around Australia than he'd ever seen anywhere in his life. And so he told Cook and Banks not to call it Stingray Harbour, but to call it Botany Bay. And no Australian knows that bloody story. Do any of you know that story? I heard this story 2 weeks ago on the back label of their bloody new gin. So there is botany, there is incredible botanicals in Australia that we've only really just scratched the surface of what we can use. I reckon we've probably used 60, 80 different botanicals over the last 4 or 5 years. What do you reckon you guys have done?
Oh, we've used a dozen or so, but there's so many out there. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful ones. We've just got to try them and see whether you like them.
There's a magnificent product using green ants, if anyone has seen the Adelaide Hills distillery. And you think, oh, crazy gimmick. It's spectacular. Using ants sort of essentially foraged in the indigenous communities in the Northern Territory. And it gives it this this little spark, the gin. It's quite a phenomenal gin, isn't it, George? It's Sacha Laforgia and the guys from Adelaide Hills. Isn't the Brookies nice? But that's a beautiful, classic, balanced, really well put together gin. And they had a very famous distiller come out and start with
Jim McEwen.
Jim McEwen came out to sort of help them write the original recipe for that. So it's a beautiful gin. We very much like that Brookies gin, and I'm just going to make sure that I'm running on time so we don't run over because everyone wants a drink, don't they? Yes, of course they do. Well, there's drinks in front of them. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Stu.
You didn't know you were coming up here until about 10 minutes ago, did you?
I did not.
Tell us about Seppelsfield Road, and everyone wave, because her husband is filming it. Hi, John. Hi, everyone in the Barossa.
But yeah, so we are literally 9 months old. We opened our doors on the 1st of September last year, and we started out with absolutely no idea of what we were doing. Our main goal was just to make good gin. We didn't start out with any ideas about particular botanicals or gin styles or anything like that. In fact, the idea of starting recipe development was one of the most daunting things I've ever had in my entire life, given that I didn't have any idea of the direction that we wanted to go. And so as such, this gin has kind of evolved from the botanicals that I loved the most while I was doing recipe development. This one's not particularly juniper forward. We like to say that this one is quite an approachable gin. One of the biggest comments that we had when we started telling all of our friends, family, anyone who would listen that we were building a gin distillery was, I don't like gin. And I said, leave it with me. And our conversion rate, particularly with this gin, as Stu was talking about before with their rare dry, our conversion rate of people coming into the distillery just to have a look. We have look up our Facebook page, look up our Instagram page. We've actually got a fantastic site. You mentioned before that you had about 100,000 visitors through the doors. In 9 months, we've had nearly 40,000 people from through our doors.
Talisker would kill for those sorts of numbers. Like, seriously.
And so we're very lucky.
I'm not picking on the one family, sorry.
Yeah, we're very lucky with the location that we are in the Barossa, but we've also done that very deliberately. We wanted to create a visitor experience. We want to educate people about gin. We want people to see, we want people to experience, we want them to have that connection with our brand. And we think with all of our range of gins, if you're at Ginapalooza tomorrow, please come and try them all. We've got four gins in our range. That all of our gins have something different to offer and they all connect beautifully with our brand. But this gin in particular, as I mentioned, not particularly juniper forward. These are single shot distillation with a combination of botanicals in the pot and vapour infusion. So fresh orange peel and fresh grapefruit peel for this one.
Yeah, you get that.
Yeah,
yep.
And that's obviously in the vapour basket. This one's got elderflower, blue cornflowers, chamomile and lavender as the light florals. There's also there's a bit of borage in there and there's some cinnamon which kind of helps to give it just a roundness. But yeah, really approachable. And yeah, a gin that's our best selling gin.
So Seppelsfield Road's very famous. If anyone knows the Barossa Valley, I mean, it's the heart and soul of the Barossa pretty much. Were you in the wine game before this?
I've done a couple of vintages. My family are all in the wine industry. My father was a winemaker. My uncle was the senior winemaker for Lindeman's Wines for many, many years. But I'm actually an ex-police officer.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Oh, bloody.
Not for a long time, but...
Really?
No, yeah.
Papa.
Yep. But yeah, as I said, starting a gin distillery was a throwaway comment, but a throwaway comment that we picked up on and we've carried on with. And like I said, we're now 9 months into being open, and we won a gold medal at the London Spirits competition last month with this gin.
Fantastic.
So we're very proud of where we've come in a very short period of time.
Yeah, amazing, great story. And export to the UK, maybe?
Our first pallet of gin arrived during the week for Ginapalooza, and we will. Now that we have stock here, we will be starting to work on distribution.
And what about you two guys, George and Dave? Available in the UK?
Yeah, we launched in January at Merchant House. Where's the guy from Merchant House? Is he here?
Right there. Oh, no, not anymore, but it used to be him. Lewis is here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, through Anotria. So, I was pounding the streets of Leeds and Liverpool and Manchester during the week. It rained on me a lot, but that's all right. But yeah, it's hard work, right? So we're having to do the same things that we did in Australia. It's one bar at a time, one off licence. You got to go to Ginapalooza. You got to do your tastings. There's no easy ride, so we don't treat it that way. We're here. We're here talking to you. So I'm glad to hear
I
that.
think we've decided it's graft, isn't it?
Graft, it's graft.
That's my one. That's my one learning out of today. And George, you're here now.
We've done a soft launch last week with direct to consumer through Gin Kiosk, and then we do have a kind of Australian wholesaler that's doing fulfilment and invoicing, but we're controlling sales for now. But part of the trip is to speak to a bunch of people to get it going in a bit more of a full way.
Okay, last gin is.
What's this one?
It's the purple one, we call it, the purple drink. So this is our, I suppose this is an Aussie riff on slow, if you like, and a couple of things. We're very, if we're going to call it gin, it's got to be over 37.5%. So this is 37.8%. Just want to make that point. And the base of this is our rare dry gin. So this is pretty simple. It's rare dry gin poured over this year almost 100 tonne of Shiraz. And basically steep it for about 8 weeks, stir it every day, bottle it off, unfiltered, unfined. So that is just, and then add more gin back. So that's just gin and the flavour of Shiraz grapes. Nothing more than that. And I may pinch that tagline that you put up for 3/4, 1/3 of it is rhubarb juice. Yeah, 1/3 of it is Shiraz juice. Interestingly, there's been some. People wonder whether it's been in Shiraz barrels. They wonder whether it's actual Shiraz wine that's blended. It's not. It's just full clusters, berries, and gin poured across over the top. And we launch that every year on June 1. So Junipalooza tomorrow. So it's a vintage product. So that's our 2019. You're the very first people to taste the 2019 outside of Australia. So it was launched last Saturday in Australia, June 1. We try to turn it into a bit of a day, Bloody Shiraz Day. We deliberately go a week before World Gin Day to subvert all the rest of you trying to do your publicity. We just get in a week early, bastards. It's a pretty obvious technique. And that's our Bloody Shiraz gin. And funnily enough, it may be a great surprise to you that I might be considered just a bit of a wanker. My wife, who definitely thinks that, we were trying to come up with a fancy name for it. So in our winemaking days, we were talking about Sangye, to bleed. When you're bleeding the colour, you're making rosé or anything else, and you leave the skins. So we were talking about Sangye, Sangio, Sangiovese, blood of Jesus and all that sort of stuff. And I was sitting there with Cameron, and we'd had quite a bit to drink and everything else. We're coming up with all these ridiculous names, doing exactly what we said we wouldn't do, trying to come up with clever, smart-arsey names for it. And she just literally walked past and she just shook her head and said, "Oh, it's just a bloody Shiraz gin." And we went, "Yes, it is." Awesome name. And I think that's resonated pretty well. That it couldn't be more Australian. And I think that's again another thing that we like is that we might be a little bit more bogan than Never Never and Seppelsfield. We might be a little bit lower brow, but we can live with that. So someone's got to be at the bottom of the pit really to make all you guys look posh. And that's So that's probably got about 95 grams of sugar, if we're going to talk about grams per litre of sugar, all of which is natural, straight out of the Shiraz grapes. It's something that, in an Australian context, again, I think people go, "Well, I don't like gin, but I like that bloody Shiraz thing," and that'll do us any day of the week. And if that creates more interest in the category, well, great. And if people come, one of the things about consumers and drinkers, whatever, is that they can come into a category in a multitude of different ways. Never believe that there is a singular route into a market or into a category. There's not. There's 1,000 different ways people will end up coming into gin. Some of them may come in through their parents, some may come in through a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or some might just come into it because they stumbled into a distillery one day and thought, "Oh, well, I might as well give it a shot." There's not one singular route. So if you give people many more opportunities to start or to engage, or whatever the latest marketing whiz word is, I think that's the way we get people in this gin category. It is a very exciting time. We've said here, these are some of the things that we think that make Australian gin great. But the botanicals, we've got incredible produce. Those of you who've ever come and eaten and drunk in Australia know that. The food and the bar culture is great now, really great. A spectacular climate, obviously. I mean, it's not London in spring, 14 and rainy, but honestly, we do our best. And I just reckon from us little Aussie battlers having a crack at London, thanks for having us. Good on you. Let's go and have a gin and tonic.